I'm kind of I'd say I think there's reason to be a little bit worried about the debt in the US. It's something you've highlighted a lot, and I think it's pretty clear that a lot of the that this administration isn't one that's especially good at fixing it, or it's just I feel like I mean the last Donald Trump administration was very high spending, and I think all signals are just that that's kind of the natural mojo for this administration now, and that's very counter to the to what we hoped for. To what we hoped for 3 months ago, and certainly what the narrative was around him. And I think that that's changing, and I think that's going to continue to change. So, um, the gold market is very clear about its worries around that, and I think Bitcoin is as well. And I think Bitcoin is. I was talking to a interesting conversation. I have a friend who's one of the more successful one of my college friends who's one of the more successful finance guys I know. He's a very senior guy at Millennium right now, and was very senior at a top tier investment bank for 16 years before going there. And he's never been a crypto guy. And I will say this also, I did verify when talking to him, whenever you see anyone post about how Millennium's buy or selling, ignore it, because Millennium only puts on arbitrage trades. They have zero, as a fund, they have zero directional view on Bitcoin as a broader fund. So that's a lot of garbage on the timeline. But he was even talking about how for him personally that he and his wife were actually talking about buying Bitcoin for one of the first times because of concerns around kind of the role the U.S. wants to take in the global monetary system, and how if the dollar kind of it does not remain the cornerstone, that Bitcoin could be a good alternative. So again, irrelevant conversation, but just one more anecdote to the list of someone who I did not expect to be having that conversation with after 30 years of friendship, but probably 10 years where we've had different views on crypto.
You mentioned final thing on this, and then Ryan, want to come to you on give us the perspective of what's going on in Dubai. You mentioned the debt. My understanding was the House has put that through now, right? And there's a lot of people, well, I think ultimately the conclusion is that there's not a lot of people on either side of the aisle, despite a lot of talk coming from the Republican side that this is they've got a mandate to cut, to make specific cuts. I don't even think it's been the case that in the House, on the Republican side, that there's sufficient support for that kind of mandate. And so am I right in saying that this has moved towards the Senate now? And basically people have thought that, look, this is just going to go through as it is, and it's going to
I've seen rumblings. I mean, you have like Ron Johnson, who's the senator from Wisconsin, who's like a deficit hawk. I mean, you need to have three or four senators in the Republican Party reject it. And I think the one thing that the Republican Party is very clear on is don't fuck with Donald Trump. So it would be violating rule number one, and we saw in the House that people who I think have very real objections to this at the end passed it. And part of it's spending. The other thing is taxes. Taxes are like, it's revenue versus and costs are the two factors. And if you're cutting taxes, like that is, and I think one kind of rule of thumb for almost everybody, Democrat or Republican, but certainly the Republican Party, is don't raise taxes and don't get in the way of tax cuts. But it flies at very sharp odds with the idea that we want to cut the deficit, because that's the biggest source of income that we have. So, I think the tax cut heavy thing is something that kind of passes the narrative test, but it's extremely bad for the deficit.